Hello, thank you for joining me today. My name is Terrence Weinzierl. I'm one of the creative type directors at Monotype, where I've been designing type for almost 15 years. Monotype, if you don't know, we are a type foundry. We empower creative minds to build and express authentic brands through design, technology, and expertise. We have one of the largest font libraries in the world, including iconic typefaces like Frutiger, Helvetica, and Gotham, for example. The Monotype studio, where I work, we make custom typefaces. We either modify licensed fonts or we create new typefaces from scratch. And I also help people find the right fonts, kind of like a librarian. But today I'm here to talk about the neuroscience behind the emotional power of typography and our study with neurons. So letters represent sounds. So type is sound made visual. Type is a big part of every brand. It's an essential ingredient, and we choose and direct other visual elements along with colors and photos and illustrations, logos, all with great attention to detail. But type is the element that strings together different touch points. So not choosing a typeface or using a system default is a choice itself, just like white paint is a choice. Every choice means something. So you can choose how much you want your type to blend in or stand out. And it's true that some brands have quiet, simple type, and other brands have lush, expressive type. It all kind of depends on who you are and what you're trying to say. But a type choice can't be judged without taking into account the actual message itself. Brands rely on type to convey trust and sincerity and reliability. Even if the design is flawless, the second the type breaks down is the second that doubt or concern can creep into someone's mind. Is that message legit? Is this the same brand? So since the rise of branding and advertising, brands have used typefaces to differentiate themselves from competitors, obviously. The equity and the recognition can take a while to build, but once it's built, it really pays off. Our lives are saturated with typography, seemingly invisible or not. Written language is a global experience. We all can connect to it and we all experience it. We all feel it. It's really potent. A simple shape like this that elicits so much cognitive and emotional response is really just amazing. So I want to do a warm-up exercise with you, a little bit of type 101. And if you're a graphic designer, this will come easy to you. And if you're not, then maybe this will be a refresher. But if we look at the word chicken in different typefaces, which one of these looks spicy? Might be number 3, maybe. Which one is creamy? Maybe it's number 2. Which one looks expensive? Or which one looks inexpensive? So maybe 4 looks more expensive than number 1. So if we think about these as emotion instead of flavors or prices, maybe we could see which one looks calm and happy, or which one looks angry or excited. Maybe the italic on number 4 looks sentimental and trustworthy, or maybe the sans serifs number 1 could be optimistic or innovative. Typefaces are a messaging shortcut that we see and use every day, piggybacking subconscious meaning while we read. So typography at its worst can be a jarring hindrance, perhaps making something distracting or hard to read. But good typography has authenticity, which elevates the content, adding beauty and emotion to the reading experience. So just as the psychology of color reveals, colors can make you feel differently too. The calmness of a green or blue, maybe the happy energy of the yellow and orange, the urgency of red. These might vary across cultures and histories, of course, but just as we looked at with the chicken example, a similar psychological effect happens with typefaces. One can look more calm or more energetic. So the cognitive duties of type come first, the legibility and readability parts. But the second layer is the sentiment, the emotion. It amplifies the word and the message in immeasurable ways, but we're going to try to measure it anyway. So designers do this instinctively. We choose typefaces that convey a concept. And through this practice and observation, we get better at the skill, really finding typefaces that are perfect for a particular brand or use case. And as you're selecting typefaces, you might ask yourself, how a particular feeling can be made visual. What makes something look friendly and safe, for example? What does comfort actually look like? Is it round and soft and calm? But what's the opposite of comforting? Is it maybe adventurous? Is it sharp, rough, harsh? Is there risk or danger? Maybe it's diapers and camping. I'm kind of half joking with these, but it's cliche because it's true. If you go down the children's aisle at the store and count how many rounded typefaces you'll see, you'll probably find dozens. Prototyping the typeface with the rest of a brand system, along with the color and the copy and the images, is a decisive test. You can ask yourself, does it convey the meanings, the feelings, and the values I'm trying to convey? So our relationship with type is an emotional one, whether we realize it or not. Decades of research and thought have gone into the branding and psychology of color, but far less attention has been paid to the science of type and emotion. So proving that our brains have a significant response to letter shapes should put type choice at the top of the branding agenda. And it supports our belief that fonts influence not just how easily people understand something, but the way it makes them feel. So the challenge is, why does it really matter? You usually don't have to convince other graphic designers, like I said, but rather everyone else. And that's really what this study is all about. How can we prove the emotional value of typography to someone who might not be a designer? Maybe it's an executive or a marketing manager or someone who needs to see numbers. So if all of these logical and formal attributes are one side of the coin, emotions are on the other side. And for all the beauty in the craft and art of typography, which I love, there's also a lot of science too, right? Reading. So I'm sure you've seen some perception mapping like this, and it can be a really helpful tool to work through potential choices, or maybe evaluating where your brand is and where you want it to go. This is where the values come into play, the market positioning, the tone of voice, the sentiment, all of the ways we describe and shape a brand. And all of this work is to help those who live the brand really articulate in their own words what their typographic voice could be. It's a process of discovery, refinement, and alignment too. So it's no easy task really to choose where a typeface would fit on a map like this. And that's one of the other reasons for doing this project with Neurons. We want to help you prove the value of type and why it matters. Can these brand values be tested against and proved against different forms? Can type be used to reinforce a brand value? Are the assumptions and design instincts really true, like scientifically true? And do they really build trust between a brand and a consumer? So the study takes those emotional questions and variables and gives them numbers. So how did we do it? We partnered with an applied neuroscience company called Neurons, and they've worked with a bunch of academic partners, the Harvards, the Stanfords, the MITs. They have a who's who of top global brands. I really wish I could see what they looked at with Lego or something. It'd be really interesting. But the first Neurons study that we did is really a starting point for us. If you have a new powerful telescope, like the Webb telescope, you have to point it at something. There has to be a first image. And will the first image be the best? Probably not. So here we are. Neurons is like a new telescope for us to work with. Of all the typefaces possible for a study like this, we had to pick just 3 to start with. Not because they're the best or the most obvious, but mostly because they're distinct from one another and representative of a genre. So we base these choices on our experience working with custom type for brands, and each of the typefaces in the study conjure up kind of just the right amount of recognition. They look similar to something you've seen, but aren't associated with specific well-known businesses. So we're trying to avoid some conscious associations with like an existing brand, right? So, well, I'll show you the details of the 3 typefaces in the study, and then we'll look at even more details about the study. So the first typeface that we chose for the study is called Gilroy, which is a geometric sans serif designed by Radomir Tinkov, which kind of nicely sums up the genre. A geometric sans serif is kind of reduced to this bare bones of circles and squares and triangles, or in other words, kind of how alphabets were rationalized into the most pure geometric forms they could possibly handle, kind of like an old Braun alarm clock. But geometry is kind of relatively new, from the 20th century. It represents a clear and impersonal Bauhaus ideal. They're not perfectly geometric, of course. The circular shapes are optically adjusted. It's born from modernism with an overall sense of monolinearity and clinical precision. Geometric sans serifs like this one, they look forever modern, and they're often described as clean and clear, and they offer this kind of crispness that pairs well with a lot of digital design. The voice is future thinking and confident and assured. It doesn't care about details or nuance. It just kind of gets to the point. So you could guess that a typeface like this looks more innovative than other typefaces, and tech brands and automotive brands love it for those reasons. Humanist sans serifs are everywhere. If you think about Calibri and Myriad and Frutiger and how much impact they've had on the design world. The forms are from humans. They are evolved from calligraphic qualities. They're kind of abstracted and perfected from hundreds of years of Latin writing traditions. They're gestural and less rigid looking, and they're like a crossroad of man and machine, right? FS Jack, this one in the study, is the humanist sans, and you can see the calligraphic traits in the corners and the terminals, the way the letters end. And these type styles often look familiar and subtle with those kind of obvious connections to a human hand. They have very open apertures, which are good for small screens or small text on screens. And they really end up feeling natural and comfortable, more so than a geometric sans. And they often have this kind of friendly and experienced tone. They're serious but not stuffy, clear and distinct forms that they're just easy to read. And industries like finance and healthcare use this style a lot, as well as really demanding UI environments. So naturally, serif typefaces like this one, there's a lot of subgenres and roots from different places and times in history. It's kind of too much to get into right now, but they're also informed by human hands and calligraphy, and you can kind of see and feel the lineage here. They are, again, an abstracted version of calligraphy, and the stroke contrast, which is to say the thicks and thins, are from pens and handwriting. The angle of the pen forces you to create this contrast. They're often seen as serious and professional, elegant, sophisticated, and they're loved by the fashion, luxury, editorial industries too. Cotford is this very recent contemporary serif typeface by my colleague Tom Foley, and you might recognize it for its transitional serif predecessors like Caslon or Baskerville. And it has this mostly vertical axis, serif bracketing, which is what we call the kind of little rounded corners in there. and bulbous but not perfectly round terminals. So even with its traditional looks, it's really quite expressive and decorative, and it has a lot of movement in it. You might say it's swishy. So each of these, now to get into the study, so each of these typefaces were paired and tested with the same message to influence how the respondents felt about the type corresponding to the statement being made. I'll tell you more about that in just a second. So we chose words that convey these kind of core brand values that keep coming up in our work in mission statements. And we surveyed 400 people in the UK, ages 18 to 50, with an even gender split, using 3 kinds of stimuli. The first was single words like this: quality, innovation, and trust. And each of those words were set in each typeface, okay? So it gets kind of more complicated from there. The second stimuli was a sentence using those same ideas kind of trust, quality, and innovation. But the sentences were: quality never goes out of style, like always, never before, and by your side for 100 years. So, and then finally, we used those sentences including a fictional brand name. So Avendi was kind of like the fashion brand, Scova was supposed to sound like a tech brand, and Smith's Bank is obviously like a financial services company. So each of these were also set in all 3 typefaces, and people rated the combinations using a range of emotional metrics like sincere, memorable, trustworthy, and confidence. And so it looked like this, for example. The image of the typeface, or with the word or the phrase at the top, and then, for example, a statement like, "This message will stand out from competitor messages." And then the user would rate them on these varying levels of agree or disagree. So Neurons told us that they usually see single-digit results, and that this particular study with typefaces gave even stronger results. So instead of seeing something less than 5%, we actually saw double-digit differences. So let's take a closer look at some of the actual test results. When we set quality in Cotford, the serif typeface, it had a 13% increase in people's judgment of relevance, and a 10% increase in how memorable it was, and a 9% increase in trustworthiness. So serif designs such as Cotford have long been kind of associated with the world of fashion, like we said, but meaning people's subconscious reaction is driven by years of cultural association. So maybe it's no surprise that our research showed that Cotford boosted people's positive perceptions of what the word quality. So FS Jack, while it's a sans, it has a double story A and G, which ties it more to the humanist way of constructing letters. And this could explain the uplift in how prominent and innovative and unique that people judged that single word in FS Jack. So it also kind of backs the assumption that styles rooted in calligraphy, or that somehow like still retain the logic of calligraphy, prompt a deeper emotional reaction than a geometric sans serif, for example. And typeface selection doesn't just reassure people that what they're reading is relevant, but it also affects how reliable a brand's messaging feels. By setting trust in FS Jack, our research showed that the significant increase was in the level of sincerity and honesty, for example. And this again demonstrates how a typeface with roots in calligraphy can elicit an immediate sense of trust in a reader. And FS Jack boosted honesty and sincerity by 5% and 10% respectively in that chart there. And if we look at something like a slogan, it was rated as being more prominent and distinct when it was set in Gilroy. So we found that the font choice really has a significant impact with people's responses for longer messages in particular, with different designs influencing how much respondents felt to the statement, as well as how relevant the actual statement was. So Gilroy performed particularly well for longer messages, maybe because like complicated sentences require kind of more time to process. You have to like think about them longer than a single word. And readers appreciate the kind of simplicity or legibility of Gilroy's kind of simple geometric forms. So that's the theory behind that result there. So you can see how type makes our messages more memorable, makes your customers feel more secure, and it gives your brand a competitive edge. So from a design point of view, you could imagine kind of pushing a typeface one way or the other to sync with the attributes that you're after. So if a brand calls up and says, we want a trustworthy typeface, we would know kind of where to start looking. So why does it actually matter? In the absence of color or logos or movement or any other element that in a visual identity, type still has a really powerful effect on people. It's astounding to think that just the simple shapes of a letter can spark this cognitive and emotional reaction, leading to a subconscious judgment of how honest or sincere or innovative an actual brand statement is. So I'll hit you with a few other takeaways here. Number one is typography matters because emotions matter. Typefaces have a subconscious and emotional impact, period. The study proved that. So use your powers wisely, I would say. Number two, the typeface itself is only one part of the equation. So the actual typography, the size, the color, and the spacing, they all influence how your type is seen and felt. So one typeface can be used in very different ways. And number three is that the shortest path is not the only path. And that is to say, you can use cliches to your advantage or not. You may have had a teacher say to you, you have to know the rules before you can break them. And I think that there is some truth there. There's a lot of like patterns and habits that exist in typography. And I think by being aware of them, you can use them to your advantage to influence emotions. Think of something like nostalgia with like the Burger King branding or something, for example. So if there's a stereotype you're up against, how can it be bumped or nudged or kind of double jumped into something new? That is to say, old ideas in a new context are new ideas. So let me tell you about what's next. Our first webinar with these results, it really raised a lot of questions from the audience, and I can't say that I can answer every one of the questions that were raised because, you know, like I mentioned with the telescope, is that sort of this was our first study and our first look into data like this, and really all of the questions that we got from the audience helped direct our choices on upcoming studies as well. So we're planning many more studies in the months ahead. So one of the studies that is currently underway is looking at the differences between glyph styles in the same typeface. So instead of comparing a sans to a serif, the question is, what does a single story A or round punctuation, what do they actually do to the emotional impact of the typography? Does changing a single glyph impact the feeling of that typeface? One of the most frequently asked questions too is about regions. So we're also looking at other regions besides the UK, which is where the first study was. And if we do that same study again with the same typefaces in a different region, will the results differ, and by how much? So that's really the question we're after. You can follow along and watch for updates from, as you would expect, Monotype's kind of social media channels as we continue to share the results of these tests along with our typographic insights. And if you want to see all of the numbers from this particular study that I showed you today, we have it all in an ebook, which you can get from monotype.com/neurons. I left the links, and I have a link to the Instagram tag in here too on the boards. So feel free to keep an eye on that. But anyways, Thank you for listening, and I will try to answer any questions. Thank you.